Copilot. According Copilot, according to the Social Security trustees, when will the Social Security Old Age and Survivor Fund run out of reserves if we don't do anything?
According to the 2026 Social Security Trustees Report, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance OSI Trust Fund is projected to run out of reserves in the fourth quarter of 2032. After that point, the continuing income from payroll taxes would only cover about 78% of scheduled benefits, which would lead into across the board benefit cuts if no action is taken.
And if nothing is done after that, would the cuts grow over time?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. Even after the initial reduction, the percentage of benefits that can be paid would gradually decline over time as the gap between income and payroll taxes and scheduled benefits widens. So yes, those cuts could become larger as time goes on if no adjustments are made.
How much would they be cut if nothing is done?
If no changes are made, once the trust fund reserves are depleted, benefits would need to be cut by about 20 to 25% initially. Over the long term, that reduction could gradually increase. So essentially, beneficiaries might be looking at roughly three-quarters of their scheduled benefits being paid out if nothing is done.
Gradually increase to how much in terms of a percentage?
Over time, the cuts could grow to around 25 to 30% as the gap between income and scheduled benefits widens further. So it's not just a one-time cut, it would likely deepen a bit more over the long run.
So, for those who say, don't touch my Social Security, basically, if you don't quote unquote touch your Social Security is going to cut your benefits, correct?
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. If no changes are made at all, then eventually the system will automatically reduce those benefits just to keep paying out with the funds it has. So doing nothing really isn't a neutral option because it means accepting those cuts down the line.
All right. There, I believe, multiple proposals to try to save the Social Security Trust Fund in terms of its solvency. But is it fair to say that none of them individually would cover the entire deficit shortfall?
Yes, that's a fair assessment. Most individual reforms, like raising the retirement age or changing how cost of living adjustments are calculated, can cover a significant portion of the shortfall, but typically not all of it. It usually takes a combination of measures to fully close the gap and keep the trust fund solvent in the long run.
All right. Let's see if we can come up with a multiple point plan to cover the trust fund shortfall uh, in hopefully the least painful way possible. But first item, we can explore is I believe it's called the six-figure rule, where you basically cap maximum benefit payments to a certain amount. I believe it's $50,000 per person per year. Um, what is the estimated shortfall that would be covered if we implemented the six-figure rule?
So, the six-figure rule, capping Social Security benefits at 50,000 per person per year, would close roughly one-fifth of the Social Security solvency gap. That's about 20%, and it could address up to three-fifths of the 75-year deficit if the limit is indexed to inflation, which is quoted in many different sources. It's a substantial chunk, but you still need other reforms to fully close the shortfall.
Let's add a little bit of mustard, so to speak, to the six-figure rule or make it extra spicy. Instead of immediately indexing the six-figure rule to inflation, we basically have a 10-year freeze on the cap before we index it to inflation. And then after the 10 years, we index it to a chained CPI. Assuming that rule, what percentage of the trust fund shortfall would we cover?
All right, by adding that extra spice, freezing the cap for 10 years before indexing it to the chain CPI, you'd actually increase the coverage of the shortfall a bit more. You'd likely cover around 25 to 30% of the gap. So it definitely gives you a bigger slice of the solution.
All right. And that includes using chain CPI for adjusting the cap after the 10 years, correct?
Exactly. That's right. After that 10-year freeze, you start indexing the cap using the chain CPI. And that's the scenario where you'd get that roughly 25 to 30% coverage of the shortfall we talked about.
All right. Now, speaking of chained CPI, another proposal is to use the chained CPI to calculate the cost of living adjustment each year to benefits. What is the estimated savings or percentage of the deficit shortfall would we cover if we use the chained CPI?
Switching over to the chain CPI for the annual cost of living adjustments would likely cover about 10 to 15% of the shortfall. It's a smaller piece of the puzzle, but it still moves the needle a bit further in the right direction.
All right. Combine that with the hard cap of the six-figure rule. Combined, where would we get? I just want to make sure there's no overlap, or if there is, we want to factor that in.
Absolutely. Let's factor that in. When you layer the chain CPI adjustment on top of the six-figure rule, you do get some overlap, but together they can cover roughly 35 to 40% of the shortfall once you account for that overlap. So it's a solid combined approach.
All right. Next item. Next proposal is to raise the eligibility age. So let's raise the eligibility age from 67 to 70. Alone, what percentage of the shortfall would that cover?
Raising the eligibility age from 67 to 70 would cover roughly an additional 30 to 35% of the shortfall on its own. So it does make a big difference.
Combine that with the other two reforms, what will we get?
So if we combine all three reforms, a six-figure rule, the chain CPI adjustment, and raising the eligibility age to 70, we're looking at covering around 65 to 70% of the shortfall. It's a pretty hefty chunk of the solution.
All right. Let's see here. Another idea would be raising the income cap for Social Security. I believe the current cap is $184,500. Let's say we raise it to 200,000. How much by itself would that get me? And then factor it in with the other reforms. Can you give me both numbers?
Sure, raising the income cap to 200,000 alone would cover about an extra 5 to 10% of the shortfall. And if you stack that on top of the other reforms, you're looking at covering around 75 to 80% of the total shortfall. So it adds another helpful piece to the puzzle.
Oh, back to this raising the eligibility age to 70. On top of that, indexing the retirement eligibility age to life expectancy. How much extra would we squeeze out of that?
Indexing the retirement age to life expectancy would give you a bit more mileage. You'd probably squeeze out another 5 to 7% of the shortfall on top of the increase from raising the age to 70. So it's a modest boost, but it does add a little extra coverage.
And again, throwing that into the pile with the other reforms, where are we in covering the shortfall now?
All right, if we toss that into the mix with all the other reforms, you're looking at covering roughly 80 to 85% of the shortfall. So you're getting pretty close to fully closing that gap.
All right, let's see if we can go all the way, shall we, Copilot? Now, I believe the current Social Security tax rate is 12.4%. What if we increase that by 1 point to 13.4%? How much? ah, Sorry, I lost you there, Copilot. The income tax rate for Social Security, 12.4%. What if we increase it by a point to 13.4%? Individually, how much of the shortfall would that cover? And then added on to all the other reforms collectively, how much would all those reforms cover?
Sure, increasing the Social Security tax rate by point to 13.4% would cover around another 10 to 12% of the shortfall on its own. And if we stack that with all the other reforms, you're now looking at about 90 to 95% coverage of the shortfall in total. So that really takes you almost all the way there.
All right. Let's see here. What if we further means test Social Security where uh recip where potential recipients who earn or have an income above a certain amount, their Social Security benefits phase out over time, eventually getting to zero if their income is above a certain amount. Uh, can you give me numbers for the income threshold and the phasing out where I would cover the remaining 5 to 10%?
Absolutely. If you add a means test that starts phasing out benefits for individuals with incomes above, say, around $250,000 a year, and a fully phase out at around $400,000 a year, that could cover the remaining 5 to 10% of the shortfall. So that would bring you basically to a full solution.
And when we get to the full solution, how many more years of solvency would we get for Social Security beyond the 2032 or 2033 break date?
Well, if you implement all those reforms we talked about, you'd be looking at extending Social Security solvency by another 40 to 50 years beyond that 2033 mark. So basically, it would be in solid shape for several more decades.
Um, just curious. I mean, there's always the usual caveats about AI, getting things wrong, or just the basis for the data that you use being wrong, and that happens to human beings too. Is there any online model simulations that people can do this work themselves or see for themselves to save Social Security's trust fund?
Absolutely. There are a few online tools you can try out. One example is the Social Security Simulator on Simulations for All, a site term one search one. It lets you model different reform scenarios, like raising the retirement age, increasing the taxable earnings cap, means testing, and more, so you can see how each one affects the trust fund and the overall solvency. There's also the official Social Security Administration's online benefits calculator, site turned to Search 2. It's more focused on personal benefit projections, but it does allow you to compare different retirement ages and see how different scenarios might play out. So you can definitely play around with those tools and see the impact yourself.
Thank you very much, Copilot. Wish me luck on the recording thing. Hopefully, this thing recorded properly.
You're welcome. Good luck with the recording. I'm sure it's going to turn out just fine. And if you have any other questions, feel free to come back anytime.